Jack Marsh's short and tragic life as an Aboriginal sportsperson is symbolic of the lives of so many other gifted Aboriginal sportspeople of the past and even the present, who were prevented from achieving their full potential because of political, cultural and racial forces bearing down on them. The Trust made extensive inquiries as to whether Jack Marsh has any kin still living to seek their familial blessing for the naming of the lecture after him, but found none. He never married. What happened to his brother Larry Marsh, no one knows. If there are indeed any surviving family, we hope they will regard the lecture as a way of honouring his life and achievements. May I just briefly take us back to Friday, 12th of December, 1902. That evening at the Sydney Town Hall, a public reception was held for Victor Trumper, arranged by the Crown Street Old Boys Union. Among those on the platform were names we know only too well from that golden age: Sheridan, Gregory, Darling, Kelly, Trumbull, Armstrong, Jones, Hill, Trumper, Noble and Jack Marsh. The Evening News reported thus, the newspaper, the Evening News: the galleries were crowded and the body of the hall was filled by people who were anxious to do honour to a great cricketer. The vast audience had the privilege of listening to a number of selections on the organ by Mr. Arthur Mason, and I'm sorry we didn't have an organ here this evening. Then there was an outburst of applause which denoted that the Australian cricketers, as well as other players, were making their way onto the platform. Presently, the clapping of hands and cheering became louder, and the cause of this renewed effort being Jack Marsh, the Aboriginal bowler, who was compelled to bow his acknowledgements. It was a grand reception and was only beaten by that which was accorded Trumper a few moments later. Tonight is a wonderful coming together of ghosts. Here we are in the M.A. Noble stand, hero or villain of the story, looking right across, or at least I'm looking right across at the Victor Trumper stand for the Jack Marsh History Lecture. Three cricketers whose lives were intertwined more than a century ago. Two of them already have their rightful place in the social and sporting history of this place. The Jack Marsh History Lecture is a tribute to the life of the third, who would be forgotten without the work of historians, but whose story ended not in glory, but in tragedy. I will let Max Bonnell have the last word. He wrote, "We should remember Jack as a uniquely gifted cricketer whose career was unjustly limited, and as an exceptional sprinter whose reputation ought to be revived. Better yet, we should show him the respect he was denied during his lifetime and remember him as an admirable man." And that is what the lecture is intended to achieve.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to, on behalf of all of our members and guests and the Trust itself, in a short matter of seconds to invite Gideon Haig to present our first Jack Marsh Lecture. You know, we've all, in one way or another, come across history and the things that we like to remember. When I was the centenary president of the Law Society, I spent the previous 18 months trying to get the history of the Law Society together so that for once and for all we had everything that had happened in the previous 100 years. And one of the councillors, who later became a judge, just made a remark in the council meeting that this was all worthwhile because those that are inclined to remember their past usually last longer than those that don't. And what we have seen in the enormous contribution of Kay and her committee, and in particular under the leadership of Rodney Cavalier, is a real attempt by this trust to remember everything that ever happened, to do with the trust, to commemorate it. And it's in that spirit, I think, that the Jack Marsh Lecture is now introduced and will be part of our perpetual memory as it occurs each and every year from now on. The other way that I like to think of it is Some of you might remember I just had a brief brush with the Olympic movement for a while. And the modern Olympic movement, started by de Coubertin when the Games in 1896, was preceded by a number of years of planning by him. And he noticed that in the development of young men in England, particularly through their public school system, that if you combined the physical with the intellectual, the likelihood was that you would get a very fine type of human being. And so the cultural program and the sports program in the Olympic movement are seen as integral one to the other in producing outstanding young people, men and women who have had the benefit of both the physical and the intellectual. And I like to think that that's what we're doing this evening. We're doing it in memory of Jack Marsh, but we're going to continue it, and the museum, our association with the Bradman Museum and the Barrel Foundation, and all that we're doing is our contribution to the intellectual side of what might go on the playing fields. And who better to give that first lecture than Gideon Haig himself. The author, I was unaware as I looked at my notes, of some 30 books already. It's said that he writes books while on the tram to work. Well, I think he must. He's been called the finest essayist of his generation by The Guardian. While we in this room know him for his work on cricket, as widely published as the author that he is and columnist for the Australian and the Times, he's written on all manner of subjects. Gideon has tackled subjects as diverse as abortion, asbestos and BHP. And that's just the first two letters in the alphabet as I see it. More than that, his measured demeanour does much to keep his colleagues sane in press boxes around the world. He's a member of the Melbourne Press Club's Hall of Fame already, and is sure to be part of the Sydney Cricket Ground's Media Hall of Honour in the years ahead. It is with great pleasure on behalf of the Trust and immense gratitude that I now ask Gideon Haig to deliver the lecture.
Thank you very much, Rod, and welcome to you all this evening. My title, which seems to combine, I don't know, Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception with Dusty Springfield's Windmills of Your Mind, is actually from a rather less exotic source, Johnny Moyes. The journalist and broadcaster Moyes may be unique in tightness of affiliation with both Victor Trumper and Donald Bradman. He became an opponent of the former, a biographer of the latter, a friend and idolater of both. He also represents a link with the man in whose name tonight's inaugural lecture has been endowed. Moyes, when he was 6 years old, first met Trumper one summer evening in December 1900 when his father, a school teacher, invited the visiting New South Wales team to their home in Adelaide. In The Changing Face of Cricket, Moyes recalls that he was at first less taken by Trumper than by his teammate Jack Marsh. He wrote, "I do not remember now whether I had seen a coloured man before, but I certainly hadn't seen one who was playing first-class cricket, and Marsh fascinated me. What a grand bowler he must have been." It was only a few weeks later that Trumper and Marsh participated in the Federation Sports Carnival at this ground, finishing first and second in the competition for throwing a cricket ball. So, when Rodney Cavalier first mooted this lecture, it seemed at once fitting to reunite these former teammates at the place their paths crossed, where a great stand now bears Trumper's name in the centenary year of Trumper's death. That, and of course, my own lifetime's fascination with Trumper, which extended to naming my cat for him. Rather than this be a recitation of familiar facts and tropes about Trumper, which I suspect you probably already know, I want tonight to consider Moyes' assertion, "Did Trumper alter cricket's face? I don't think this could be doubted." I want to do so principally by working outwards from this famous 113-year-old photograph, perhaps cricket's first truly great photograph, and still I think on par with the likes of Neil Leifer's image of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston, and Norman Potter's snapshot of Roger Bannister breasting the tape at Iffley Road Track. Great photo of that. I love the pipe in the in the mouth of the man at the finishing line. Certainly there would be few rivals to it in Australian sport. The climax of the Tide Test, perhaps, Provan and Summons at the SCG in 1963, Nicky Winmar at Victoria Park 30 years later. The word icon is so freely used today as to have been almost drained of all meaning, but I suspect the Trumper photograph is one in the truest sense of the word. It condenses a cricketer, an era, and a style in a single conception. It directs our thinking. It limits it too. For many people today, it would compose their entire knowledge of Trumper. Imagine if it did not exist. Would Trumper even be a name? Perhaps no more so than Clem Hill or Reg Duff, of whom the existing images are rather less dramatic. As it is, wherever we look for Trumper, we find this image. It's a certification of his authenticity, a statement of cricket's continuity. In discussing the importance to Ireland of its national theatre, W.B. Yeats used the expression, "a community bound together by imaginative possessions." This image of Trumper is one of our most compelling imaginative possessions, and it binds us still. The medium by which we chiefly know him also positions Trumper historically. Just as Bradman is identified with radio and Richie Benno with television, just as Dennis Lilly's threat was enhanced by the slow motion replay and Shane Warne's by the super slow-mo, Trumper's legend can, I think, be at least partly elucidated by reference to the impact on perception of action photography. This photograph was taken, as some of you would know, by George Belden, who played more than 100 first-class matches for Middlesex, Marylebone and London County between 1900 and 1907. Belden's playing career may actually be the least interesting thing about him. He was the scion of wealthy Huguenot refugees who built a fortune in maritime and auto engineering. The company made the engine seals for the Titanic, among other vessels, and marketed Britain's first anti-skid tyre. Belden had 3 large homes, at one time owned 3 handsome Rolls-Royces, and had 3 tumultuous marriages. He liked, above all, to quote the line of Robert Louis Stevenson's about the reason of the cause and the wherefore of the why. And the answer to this, whether he was studying cricket, golf, sailing or jiu-jitsu, was photography. At the time, the standard cricket image was the posed shot. The batsman in his stance, the bowler holding a ball in an outstretched arm, usually reproduced in postcard form, such as by the rival Brighton firms of E. Hawkins and Company and Foster and Company in the 30 years before the First World War. Belden belonged in an emerging genre of photography dedicated to unlocking the secrets of motion. Its pioneer was the protean Anglo-American Edward Maybridge. Maybridge's experiments began in the 1870s when he was asked to resolve the perennial question of whether a racehorse ever had all 4 feet in the air at one time, something that had cheated the naked eye since time immemorial. And cricket actually became one of Maybridge's numerous subjects. Among the images collected between 1884 and 1887 for his landmark study Animal Locomotion, you'll find a series of collar-type studies of the best all-round cricketer at the University of Pennsylvania, purveying overarm and round-arm bowling and playing the back cut and the straight drive. In the last of these, in fact, Maybridge's cricketer uncannily anticipates another of Belden's Trumper's images. Belden found a name for what he did, action photography, in order to make clear that the players were actually playing and not posing. This, he modestly observed, depended to a great degree on the skills of the image maker because, quote, to catch the player at any certain point of his movements requires as much timing with the camera as is required for any shot in cricket. And pretty soon he was the talk of the game, even if the functioning of his state-of-the-art Adams Videx, with its super-fast shutter speed and full-size reflecting viewfinder, remained rather mysterious. On one occasion, when Belden went to photograph a team, the county secretary inquired how long each exposure took. Told 1/1000th of a second, he remarked, "Oh, well then, you'll soon be through with our 11, about 1/100th of a second for the whole team." Cricket photography had still to conquer its other besetting difficulty, distance. And there would not be the first rudimentary telephoto lenses for another 20 years. So the action from games remained ever elusive. But individual instance could now be frozen. Beldam's technique was to bowl with one hand, click the shutter with a controller connected to the Videx by an 8-metre cord with the other, and at the end of a session carry off armfuls of glass plate negatives, hoping for the best. His collaborator in his explorations, which finally formed 2 books, Great Batsmen and Great Bowlers and Fieldsmen, was the ubiquitous C.B. Fry, cricketer, footballer, athlete, aesthete, polymath, pundit, novelist and naval officer. At the time, Fry was the editor of an eponymous magazine for George Newnes Publishing, and Beldam's visits to its Southampton Street offices incited frenzies of analyses and exposition. Fry's young deputy editor Wallace Myers recalled Beldam's arrival one day bearing a sheaf of new action photographs and his launching into a dissertation on the relationship between Fry's cricket drives and J.H. Taylor's golf drives. Suddenly, Beldam whipped off his overcoat and seized the poker. I dropped my pipe in momentary alarm, but he was only giving us a practical illustration of Taylor. Then Mr. Fry took the poker, stood at an imaginary wicket and knocked George Hurst with terrific force past mid-on. A discourse followed on the subtleties of wristwork, stance and follow-through. It lasted quite a long time, and I do not think we did any more planning that day. As they outlined in their introduction to Great Batsmen, the collaborators had 2 purposes, subtly intentioned. First was to break down and decode technique, to slow time down so the action might be better understood. They wrote, "It has often been said that more may be learnt by watching a good batsman actually playing than by reading all the books that have been written about cricket. But it is impossible to see the details of a stroke as the batsman plays it in real life. The eye cannot follow the rapid and complicated movements of arms, hands and bat. Here, action photography is of value, since it shows us in full detail the various stages in a stroke and thus betrays secrets which the human eye cannot detect. We hazard the prophecy that no one who studies the pictures in this book carefully will fail to acknowledge that they show him a great many points which he never suspected." To this first purpose of scientific exploration was attached a second purpose, auxiliary, but also of immense appeal to Fry and Beldam, both classicists and connoisseurs. They wanted to create art, or at least to reveal cricket's artistic beauties. They wrote, "It has been said that the results of instantaneous photography, however true to nature, are generally inartistic in effect. Very true, but very ugly. Possibly such an opinion may be revised in the light of a study of these pictures of live cricket. Some of the attitudes may seem strange and unfamiliar to those who have never studied great batsmen in action with very close attention, but some of them go to prove how beautiful the game is cricket, and to suggest that the sculptor of modern times might possibly achieve statues of athletic perfection in no wise inferior to those of ancient Greece in the days of the athletic prizeman. Apart from the purely technical aspect of the art of batsmanship in these pages, we hope that the pictures have caught something, at any rate, of the glow and the glory of the game with the beautiful name." Thus, Trumper. There could have been no subject more fitting. The year in which Beldam turned his attention to cricket was Trumper's Annus Mirabilis. He peeled off 1100s in compiling a record 2,570 runs while touring England, and his portrait glowed from the middle of Wisden's 5 Cricketers of the Year. And when Beldam first peered through his emulsion at the image of Trumper jumping out to drive, he would have imagined all his purposes fulfilled. Beldam eventually assembled 2 sequences of photographs of Trumper, 3 years apart, at the Oval and at Lord's. His final selection occupies 30 glossy pages in Great Batsmen, including these vivid, dynamic, stirring images. But plate 27 is clearly the standout. As a technical document, it represents both the first and last word in batting, insofar as batting consists of making instinctive what begin as a set of quite unnatural motions. In this image, Trumper seems to achieve the complete reconciliation of the orthodox and the spontaneous, the rehearsed and the original. Everything is in equipoise. One foot is grounded, the other airborne, one hand is gloved, the other bare. The shirt seems both loose and taut, the arms appear both gloriously free and tensed for action. The stroke is both instantly recognisable and uniquely his. Though the bat is slim, like a rapier, held lightly, its imminent impact is palpable. Bat speed often confounded Beldam's shutter, fast as it was for its time. In any number of shots, like this of Archie McLaren, you see the bat blurred and bowed. In this amazing image of Frank Ford, it's invisible altogether, but not with Trumper, where it seems to have been captured at the moment of perfect stillness before commencing its downswing. As art, it's also a triumph. The composition is unimprovable in the equidistance of the feet from the left and right edges, in the background horizontals that accentuate the forward motion, in the background verticals that express the pent-up power, in the transition from the crease line emerging diagonally from the bottom left to the empty space in the top right that seems to afford the ball an exit point, in the elusive motive sporting life, blurred but still legible in the distance. Returning the compliment, Sporting Life, Britain's best-selling sports periodical, would dub the book Great Batsman the most precious gem that cricket literature has ever possessed. The Sydney Mail, when Great Batsman arrived in Australia only a couple of months after its English publication, went still further. This book may not be literature, but it will be studied by thousands with an avidity which no other literature would command. In its way, it is certainly art.